Hi, everybody. Delighted to welcome you to this London International Klezmer Experience session with the wonderful Sherry Mayrent, who needs no introduction, but just briefly, she's a composer, she's a teacher, she's made a huge collection of recordings which are available to the likes of us, and we're delighted to have her here tonight to talk about Belf, Off the Shelf.
Thank you. Thanks, Ilana. I'm so happy to be here. A disclaimer and some acknowledgements. First of all, I want to make very clear, I am not the person who did the original discographic digging. The people that I will mention shortly are those folks to whom I'm very grateful. What I've tried to do for this session is put it all together in a way that makes sense and perhaps identify some tentative conclusions that we can make. Of course, we're never, ever going to know the entire story and the absolute truth of some of these things with respect to these old recordings, because so many records are just not available. But I think we've been able to advance knowledge somewhat. So as Ilana mentioned, the first part of this presentation is going to be all of the sort of discographical statistical piece of things. When I'm done with that, we can stop and have a few questions, although I hope we won't take up too much time, because what comes after that is all of the listening to stuff. And I think there's just going to be a lot of really interesting things to listen to, and I wouldn't want you to miss out on that. Ilana will be periodically posting links to a Dropbox folder, which includes the audio for the 12 most recently discovered Belf audio recordings, as well as a bunch of the documents that I'll be presenting during the first part of the talk. So feel free to explore those and enjoy them at your leisure. So thanks. First to Jeffrey Wallach, who is not only the person who knows the most about Belf, the man, but also was responsible for the first discographic efforts of the Belf recordings, to Kurt Björling, who I think more than anybody in the early days of the klezmer revival, as it is, brought both Belf style and repertoire to the greater audience. And certainly it was from Kurt that I learned about it and learned to love it. Thanks to Christina Crowder and the Klezmer Institute for asking me to take part of their Gramophone in Focus series earlier this year, which planted the seeds for this presentation, and also hooked me up with Michael Aylward, to whom I'm incredibly grateful. He's been very generous in sharing the fruits of his labors and discussing conclusions with me during the process of putting this presentation together. So thanks to all of you very much. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Hang on a sec. Okay, so I apologize for the Christological title of this. When Ilana asked me for title of the talk, we were in the middle of that season for that other holiday, and it just struck me as amusing. Anyway, so what is the, how do you evolve a corpus of material? Well, you know, in the case of a lot of the American recordings, they sort of came out fully sprung. We had Spotswood's discography, and we had tons and tons of extant recordings. But for Belf, this was not the case. And for some of you who are among the younger people among us, it's probably hard to imagine a world where there really wasn't much known about Belf. First thing that happened was Martin Schwartz reissued a single Belf recording on his very first reissue of klezmer music that we had, and that was very exciting. Then we had Henkes very early on discovered a cache of Belf Sirena recordings at Gratz College, and made transfers of those and started circulating those around on cassettes. A couple of them appeared on KlezCamp resource tapes in the mid-'80s. Then Kurt went and amazingly collected together everything that was known at the time that he did this, put it together on resource tapes that he made available to people on these cassettes. Then on Klezmer Pioneers, Henry Saposnik reissued 2 more Belf sides. Then we had that was all sort of through the 90s. Then at the beginning of the 2000s, Kurt made contact with Abe Galper up in Toronto, who had a cache of not just the several Sirena discs, but all of the known Stella recordings that we have that currently reside in my collection. And I helped make that come about. So that's why they ended up in my collection, which was great. RussianRecords.com, which is an incredible resource for those of you who don't know it, for all things both pre-revolutionary and Soviet Russian recordings on 78. People post up there, and they actually offered audio tracks for both sides of an Ammer gramophone Belf recording, as well as one previously unheard Sirena disc. In the early, I think it was 2006 or so, I acquired a cache of almost all of the, at that time, known Sirena discs from a dealer in Brooklyn. And I've continued to collect and managed to accumulate 5 additional previously unheard Sirena recordings. And finally, just most recently, like 2 weeks ago, Michael Aylward discovered documentation of 30 previously unknown supposed Belf recordings on the RAOG label, of which we will hear more in a bit. Okay, so where do discographers get their information? I thought that would be interesting just to review briefly, because not everybody is as nerdily involved in this kind of work as some of us are. So first of all, there are record company ledgers and other records from record company files. The problem for the European recordings is that a lot of these have been destroyed because of wars and so forth. There are record catalogs, which were printed catalogs that for the most part were sent out to dealers so that they would know what to order for their stores. There are advertisements in newspapers and industry publications. And finally, this is the gold standard, there's information on the labels of extant recordings, because they're really the only ones that we know for sure were actually issued. In the case of the Stella recordings, that's really the only information we have, because to date, there really isn't a Stella catalog, or nobody's really found a lot of other information on them, except on the Russian Records site. There's a PDF that someone posted that just lists basically the numbers and the performer and the title without any indication of where that information came from. The source for the discographic information that I'll be presenting to you today is first from Jeff Wallach's article, which you can see there up on the screen in the ARSC Journal. Second, from Thomas Larsky's humongous and landmark discography of the Sirena Record Company. From Michael Aylward, his discography has not been published anywhere. He's still working on it, but he very generously has made that information available to me. And again, the information on the labels of the records themselves, most of which I actually have in my collection. So that's really, that's been enormously helpful. This is the 2 pages of the Russian Gramophone Company, the RAOG catalog that Michael shared with me. I don't read Cyrillic, although I'm getting better at it, but I do recognize this word right here, which is Belf. I'm always happy to see that. So these are this, and then on to the second page, all of these, you'll see these are the 2 titles. This is the release, the catalog number. This is the 2 titles. These are their matrix numbers. And the fact that this line shows that these were paired together on the same record. So these would have been the 2 sides of the same disc. That's important. The matrix number and the pairing is important for reasons which we'll get to in a moment. All right, so here is a comparison of the Sirena records and the Stella release numbers and the RAOG matrix numbers. As you can see, for everything that where we have both a Stella and an RAOG item, the numbers are identical with the exception of the two that I've highlighted. This is incredibly suggestive. Maybe I need to go back a second. The Stella recordings that we have, well, actually, it's coming up in a second as to who it is, but they aren't actually Belf. They're sometimes referred to as faux Belf, but these RAOG matrix numbers match up with those Stella numbers exactly, and the titles exactly match up, except for those two instances. I think this is significant because, in fact, the RAOG says they are Belf recordings. There's also information to be gleaned from the pairing of titles. So in this table, you can see that for quite a few of these recordings, both sides of the record have the same two titles in it as each other. Sirena, Stella, and ROG. All three have the pairing of Yichus V'Simchas Torah. There's a few here that are just Stella. We have just Stella and RAOG notations. In some instances, we've just got the Sirena and Stella pairs. We also have a Sirena and Extraphone label pairing and one of the Ammer gramophone. Now, all of this is very interesting because who is the artist on these recordings? So the Sirena recording, which we know is the actual Belf Orchestra, says the Romanian Orchestra under the direction of Kapellmeister Bandmaster V. Belf. And we're gramophone, whom I think we're pretty sure is actually Belf, based on that we only have two extant sound files to listen to, but they do, and we'll hear one of them in a moment, but that seems pretty clearly to be Belf, and that says Romanian Orchestra under the direction of V. Belf. Then we have Extraphone, which is listed as the Romanian Orchestra under the direction of Kapellmeister V. Belf. But Michael certainly would argue that he thinks that those were all pirated, but I don't know who they were pirated from, or whether, you know, that's true or not. There's at least one title, no, two titles on Extraphone that we don't find anywhere else. So I don't know who that is. And then RAOG, very interestingly, says Romanian Oriental Orchestra under the direction of the virtuoso clarinettist, clarinettist Belf, no initial given there. So that indicates that RAOG was actually selling these as recordings of the Belf Orchestra. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. And then the Stella is very interesting because they had three different attributions given. One is virtuoso clarinettist performer of Romanian Oriental melodies. One is virtuoso clarinettist performer of Romanian Oriental melodies of Belf. And the final one just says, and this is one of the ones that's in that PDF on Russian records. So I don't know where it came from, but it's listed as M. Belf, and then the abbreviation CL, which presumably indicates clarinettist, but who knows. What's interesting about this is that it never actually does come out and say, this is the Belf Orchestra, or this is the orchestra directed by Belf, and in fact, it's not. But one thing that's interesting is this performer of Romanian Oriental melodies of Belf, because at least one of the recordings, two of the recordings that have that attribution on the label are of songs from Shir HaShirim, which was a Rumshinsky composition, Yiddish operetta. And the Shir HaShirim attribution is also on the label. So it clearly doesn't mean these are Romanian Oriental melodies that Belf wrote. These are indications that it means Romanian Oriental melodies that Belf played. And I think that's significant. Now, you have to understand that at this time, the Russian recording industry was both thriving and fraught with piracy. There was a lot of that going around. Not just piracy, so there was some piracy of actual reissues of matrix numbers of performances from label to label. And the head of RAOG was known for that. His name was David Finkelstein. But also what they did very often was to get somebody else to record the same tunes. They would use the same last name of the performer they were trying to hook into, and a different initial. So hence the M. Belf, as opposed to V. Belf. We know that his initial, the real Belf's initial was V, not M. So that kind of suggests that there was that going on. It's really interesting. There are a couple of articles on about this, the Russian recording industry on the Russian records site. They're in Cyrillic, or they're in Russian, but you can use Google Translate to get a pretty reasonable idea of what they actually say. So clearly, whoever these people were, they were trying to cash in on the popularity of the Belf Orchestra. Now, just to put that in perspective, the number of tunes recorded by Belf is sort of equivalent to many of the American orchestras, like Candell, and not quite as many as Abe Schwartz, but getting up on there. And you know, this wasn't just a sort of a three-hit wonder orchestra. Okay, this is a sample page of one of the documents that I provided, and I provided each of these in both whatever I created it in this case, a Word file, and also as a PDF, just in case you don't have access to Word. So what you're seeing here is each of the known titles that we have, and across the 5 different labels that we have, whether you know, how it appears on that label or in the, you know, the recording of it, the documentation of it. The ones that are in blue are ones for which sound files exist. So for example, the Bulgarsky Jacques it exists on Sirena, it exists in the Ammer gramophone, it exists in an RAOG, and it exists in a Stella recording, and we have both the Stella and the Sirena versions. So you could compare those if you wanted to. So that's what, like I said, this is the sort of template that I've used to extract the information about who recorded what and how many things there are, how many tunes there are, and all, and so forth and so on. This just, I included this just because it's interesting. These are titles that don't have any other counterpart, that don't have any counterpart in any of the other labels. And it's just, this is what might be awaiting us in future discoveries if we're so lucky. As you can see, a lot of them, fortunately, most of them are Sirenas, and we have quite a lot of them already, which is good. So we do know them. Anyway, that's in the resource folder, and you can peruse it at your leisure. Okay, so here's the sort of overall analysis. There were 66 currently known Sirena recordings, and the caveat is that Larsky has made it very clear that his discography, while complete in the sense that these are all the records available to him, he knows for a fact that some huge percentage of the recordings that Sirena issued have been lost in terms of their documentation. So it's possible that there are more records out there that we just don't know about yet. We know of 32 on the Ammer gramophone label. We know of 20 on the Extraphone label. We know of 30 on the RAOG label, and we so far have 40 on the Stella label. Only one tune appears on all five labels. 9 appear on 4 of them, 10 appear on 3, 24 appear on 2. So there's clearly a lot of overlap. You can see certain of them appear on one label only, and again, mostly on Sirena, which I think we need to regard as the sort of gold standard of what actually is Belf. So in conclusion, we have 91 more or less unique titles drawn from the Sirena, Ammer, gramophone, and Extraphone labels, which are, because it's pretty clear that the RAOG and the Stella were not actual Belfs. We have 113 titles if you assume that even though they aren't recordings of the Belf Orchestra, that they were titles that were known somehow to have been recorded by Belf. Now that is an assumption, it could be incorrect, but we don't know, so we might as well proceed along on that assumption. We have sound files for 49 or 54% of the certain Belf tunes and 58 or 51% of the 113 possible universe of tunes, which is pretty good considering we're talking about European recordings. And we also have non-Belf sound files like vocal recordings or something of identical titles for several more of the tunes that are known to be theater tunes. There were 2 Sirena recordings that have the same generic titles, but different release numbers as extant recordings. One's a Jacques and one's a Bessarabian Hora. We have no idea what these other ones are, if they're re-recordings of the ones we already know or if they're new ones. Okay, and then the other resource that I've provided, and this one was the one that was really fun to do. This is a sample of the spreadsheet that I made that has all of the extant recordings in this universe of what we've been talking about. So here it shows the title and the Sirena release number, if we have one. And these numbers in the sound file are the numbers in my own collection, just so that if anybody asks me for something, I can find it. There's a Stella release number, if there is one, and a Stella sound file, if we find it. And then I went through and listened to all of the other instrumental recordings that I have, both in my collection and from other people that I've gotten, reissues and so forth over the years, and found other recordings of these same tunes, or that tunes that may not be identical, but that share DNA. And so this is available in the resource folder as well. So for example, the tune American Skaya was recorded twice by Max Leibowitz under 2 different titles, and also by Hochman's Orchestra. So that, I think, will be, we'll listen to a few of these kinds of things in the second half of the presentation, but basically this will show how far afield the Belf repertoire actually went. And it's kind of fun to listen to all the different versions of things. So that's sort of the discographical portion of the section. If you want, we can stop and have some questions. I haven't been looking at the chat, obviously, but let me stop the share for a moment and see if people are there. Ilana, do you want to pull things from the chat, or do you want to just open it up?
Sure. I'll just go back to Steve Weintraub was asking, were personnel listed in company ledgers?
Certainly in the American ones, yes. I think I really don't know what's in the, I don't think they found a lot of ledger information for any of these European recordings. Jeff, do you have an answer to that?
Well, the only one that there's any information in ledger is the Amours that were recorded in Warsaw. And no, they don't list personnel in there. They do list the date of recording. There were only 2 sessions, which were 2 days apart. Can I make a comment, or no? I'm
Sure.
butting in. Well, no, just about you were talking about the RAOGs and the matrix numbers being similar, and how that was intriguing. But I really doubt if they were actually not the same recordings, because even if they were pirated, I don't think, especially if they were pirated, they wouldn't have the same matrix numbers, because that's like saying, hey, these are pirated. I mean, nobody does that, even as far as I know. They maybe they were issued on their label, but they probably had some kind of an arrangement with Stella.
That could be, but I mean, I guess the main point is that they are versions of the Stella recordings, not of the Belf recordings.
Right, that's for sure.
Yeah.
If people want to put up their virtual hand, there are questions sort of piling up in the chat, and rather than everybody kind of me reading them out, it would be better if people ask their own questions, but it's hard to see. Marty Schwartz has got a question. He has a point to make.
Just one point, thanks. This is great, Sherry. Um, I should say that before my my own reissue, the thing on the old Arhuli label, Joel Rubin reissued a number of discs from my collection under the name Yichus, and Yichus is indeed the Belf selection, one of the two Belf selections that he used. The other is Simchas Torah, which you said I think is coupled with that.
Yep.
So after Joel's Yichus, I decided to have a CD of my own. I tried to make it even better than what I gave for Yichus, and this is where the Chussedel appears. Unfortunately, the fourth of those four sides that I found in Philadelphia at the beginning, called the Versorgte Yid, wasn't reissued by any of us. I don't know who has reissued it. I assume.
Well, it's available through my collection, actually.
But it's nothing to be versorgt about. It's
No.
an interesting waltz, if you want an interesting Oriental waltz. Okay, thanks. That's it. And this
Thank
is
you.
very
Thanks,
interesting.
Martin. Joel, you had a couple of comments and a question, I think. Joel?
Well, I think it was sort of answered. I was wondering that I had the same question about the matrix numbers. I mean, matrix numbers are definitive. So if they were actually either somebody's lying or if they are the same matrix number, then it's got to be the same recording. That's
Yeah.
all. But I think, I wrote Martin's, actually the CD was originally released as an LP, and it was one of the first anthologies of klezmer music. So and the Belf Chassidel was on that too. So he's selling himself a little bit short.
Yeah.
But then we were also due to as a result of my research at the National Library in Jerusalem back in the 90s, I discovered another Belf disc, and one side of that is also on the Orchestra's anthology, I think. So there's a handful. Before now, of course, it's all online. So that's a whole nother game. That's all. I don't think I have anything else to say right now.
Thanks, Joel. There are a couple of questions that I think will be answered in the next bit, but there are a couple of questions about Belf Live. Where was he performing? as if.
Would that we knew.
Where was he performing? He was
That's one of the questions somebody's asking. And where was he touring? Where was he performing? Who wants to answer that question?
That would be Jeff, I think.
Yeah. Belf was not, I don't think he was touring or performing anywhere as far as, we certainly don't know that, but it's kind of unlikely because to everything I know about Belf, the reason he was famous was because of these recordings, and only because of these recordings, except in his, the area that he actually played in. He was a klezmer, a regular klezmer. And the question is, where was that? Well, I don't want to go through my whole talk again, but as I pointed out, whenever that talk was, about a month ago or something, I believe that we have evidence that he was based in the shtetl of Lipovitz, and that probably a couple of the other shtetls that are named in some of the titles of his, the ones that have names for, we call them loconyms or toponyms, were also places he played at because they're all on the same road from Lipovitz. One of them was Mohila Podolsky, and one of them was Skvira, and one of them was, I'm forgetting now, but there were at least four. So that's the only thing we know about that. I really don't think that he was a performer in the sense of like Frank Sinatra or somebody getting, doing tours and
Thank you. You can get access to that talk via the Klezmer Institute. It was one of the Gramophone in Focus series. Sherry, do you want to move on to the second part of your talk? I think.
Yeah,
If
let's
not,
do that. Let's
questions
do
in the
some
chat.
listening. Yeah, we'll have, if you have more questions, put them in the chat. We can address them later. All right, I'm going to share my screen again.
I had a little juice from last night. It's not here.
Okay. All right. So this is the pair. We have one disc that we have sound files for that we know of from the Amber Gramophone. This is not the correct label for that disc. I couldn't find a decent enough image of it, but that's what the Amber Gramophone label looks like. This is Chaban that was recorded, and it's clearly the same tune, but it's clearly, I think, the same performer, but it's definitely not the same recording. So I think we can rest assured that that Belf did in fact record this for both labels separately. So let's listen to the Sirena first, if I can find my cursor. There we go. And here is the Elmer Gramophone version. If you want to hear that and the other side of it, it's Jacques, and it's available on the Russian Records site. These are the RAOG and Stella pairs for which we have no other correspondence, and in all of these 5 cases, we have the Stella versions to listen to, and we don't have any RAOG, unfortunately. But what's interesting about this is that Damen and Paya and Cheshek, I think, were all theater songs. And I have found other vocal versions of those, which I listed on the spreadsheet. So we don't usually think of Belf as playing theater material, but evidently the group did that. This is the compilation of Belf and Stella pairs, of which we have quite a few. There are only 2 that we have known listings for the titles of Sirena versions, but we don't have the Sirena version. But in all other cases, the titles matching up and the performances match up. The one that does not, that's different, is Sirena 11078. You see it highlighted down at the bottom there, Romanian Jacques, and we have a Stella Moldavian Jacques, And until I discovered, I obtained that Sirena disc not terribly long ago, had no idea that these two matched up. And in fact, were the one instance where the titles don't match, but the tune does. And I'd like to play that for you here. So this is the Sirena. And here's the cello version. I picked these two to play together, first of all, because they illustrate that, if we hadn't had the actual disc to look at, we wouldn't know that these were a pair, but also because it makes the differences in the style of the two clarinetists very clear as the fact that the ensembles are the same, pretty much also clear. But you can hear from this recording that obviously Belf was much more articulate, and the Stella performer is kind of much more, I don't know, slidey. But it was clearly an attempt to capitalize on the popularity of the Belf arrangements and tunes. So it's very interesting. This is an example of a Sirena Stella pair where we only have the Stella extant. This is Oi, sa falsche Welt, Oi, what a false world. And this tune will be familiar to many of you as the terrace recording of Ditvisker Adensnigen. Stop. Okay. So now this pairing of recordings that I want to play for you of the Sirena recording Sudiha Kafis, I picked because it kind of illustrates the advantage of having this vast collection of material available. I happened to, to prepare for this session, I basically listened to all the hundreds of instrumental recordings I've amassed and was able to find some really interesting correspondences in tune. So this is the Sirena recording. And I was able to find this recording by Misha Appelbaum, a Soviet recording from the 30s. This is the second side of a two-sided Nigen on Werther, sung without words. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to this one next because it was another totally unexpected finding. So this is the Sirena recording of Nachts von Kinder, the sound file of which I actually got from Kurt. This is the one Sirena disc that I desperately wish I owned, but I don't. And so I was really delighted to find this version of that tune as recorded by the Lupiansky brothers in the Soviet recording, again from the 30s. Which I think is quite delightful. All right, let me just skip ahead again to this tune. This tune is one that's particularly close to my heart. I've said this before. It was hearing Kurt play this tune at one of my first 2 Klez camps that kind of inspired me to quit my day job and do this music full time. And had never really found any other recordings of it until for the purpose of this this talk, I did. So this is the Sirena recording. was just totally blown away by discovering this recording by Sokolov's Yiddish Orchestra of a tune called Freitag Yidelach, which is basically the same tune. It's a variant, clearly, but it follows the Belf, the shape of the Belf tune pretty closely. And then finally, this tune by Bulgarian dance by Vasily Melnikov clearly shares some of the same DNA, but it goes further afield. It only uses the A and the C section and then goes off in a totally different direction. But like I said, there's definitely shared DNA. All right, let me go back to here, Urabina. This is a tune that many of us know from the Abe Schwartz recording of Makatunum Tanz. And it's really kind of an interesting tune because the Sirena version, the Stella version, and Abe Schwartz's first version of this tune all have a very odd little introduction that they share in common. There we go. This is Sirena first. Just to show you that it's exactly the same, I just want to play the introduction of the Stella version. And the Abe Schwartz version. in the interest of time, I won't play the whole version. It's the same tune, clearly. Where that introduction came from, we'll never know either. Now, Abe Schwartz recorded a version of this tune again, a variant of it called Simchas Torah Nach der Hakafis. It's clearly the same basic tune, and it adds a fourth section. And then we have a Kandel version that it also is it's based on the variant, not on the original, and then also goes off in another totally different direction. And finally, we have Rumshinsky's version, which he calls Mazel Tov, which actually only uses the first two sections and then goes off on its own. Okay, then this will be the last comparison before we listen to the most recent Belf discoveries. The tune Hop Ya Ya, we have the Sirena version, which many of us knew originally from the Kandel version, which is called Sirpa Popular. Come on, cursor keeps disappearing. Here we go. The next version I wanted to play was recorded by the clarinettist Gregor Tsipin, who we don't know that much about, but he did record a number of sides for the Janus label. This recording appeared in that collection that Kurt obtained from Abe Galper in Toronto with no label, just written on Tsipin and Hop La La on the disc itself. And so who knows where it came from, whether it was actually from a Janus recording, although as far as I know, there isn't a Janus listing of this exact tune recorded by him. One of the other mysteries we'll never probably know the answer to. Oops, come back, play. One of the intriguing questions, of course, is whether Tsipin was the virtuoso clarinettist that recorded on the Stella label. But like I said, we don't know the answer to that. I don't want to play all these. I think people have heard the Kandel version of Serba Popular. This is just a little bit of Mishka Signov's version. I'm not going to do the rest of that. You know, for all the rest of these that are available in my collection, if there's anything that isn't available yet at the University of Wisconsin site and you'd like to hear it, you can contact me. I'll put, when I'm done with this presentation, I'll put my contact information in the chat. I'm always happy to share. This is a version that was recorded under the title of Yiddish Tanz by Tetos Dimitriadis. It's fabulous, particularly because of the bass clarinet. I think it's just not something you hear very often. And finally, this was another one of those serendipitous discoveries. I was looking for a totally different project. I was listening to things that had that seemed to be scenes about Yiddish weddings, and came across this recording of Yiddish Chasana by Isaac Feld.
Die alle Zamalki in der Husen ist allein mehr. Ai, 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 ai. Schreit am Abgrund, wenn sie kalle Fall, die sind für deine alle, machen bei mir, oi, ai, alle, oi, oi, ja, noch ist bin frei, dem Rhythm neuer Trends alle gehen.
And finally, this is the most recent Belf discoveries. There are 12 tunes, 5 of which are in my collection. The other 2 were posted on RussianRecords.com. And these are tunes, some of you have heard some of these during the Gramophone in Focus series, but and all of these are the ones that I've made available in a folder, a Dropbox folder that hopefully Ilana has posted the link to, but we'll just play a little bit of some of these. And then I know, judging from the chat, which I haven't seen, but I see that there are 50 entries in it, people have a lot to say. So let's just listen a little bit more and then we can chat. Okay, so this is Mogilovskaya. Whoops, where'd it go? Sorry, let me try that again. I don't know why it's not showing that slide. Anyway, another one I wanted to just point out is 2 sites that were recorded actually under the title, as being recorded by a Ukrainian orchestra, which are clearly, they fall right in the middle of all the other Belf recordings. And if you listen to it, it's clearly the Belf Orchestra. And thanks to Kurt for making that known. He listened to it even before I did. And posted that information and attribution on the Russian Records site. So thank you for that, Kurt. Let's listen to Ukrainsky Kazachok. And here's a bit of a Romanian dance that we know as Zilbernechasana. Oops, sorry. Can't read my own writing here. This one. I'll just end with the disc that is the very most recent discovery that discovered totally by accident and serendipity. I hadn't looked on eBay in a very long time for various reasons. And I just went on one day. This was in October. And there was this disc, and I couldn't believe that it was a Belf disc that I had never even heard of. So this is the side Olandre, and then the other side of it is up here. It's the Wallachian Fantasy. So let's just listen to a little bit of this. As I said, all of these are available in that resource folder that I've provided. So there you have it. I think, one thing that we can conclude is that it's really just a question of luck as to what turns up and what doesn't here. And we're very lucky that as much has turned up as we have. I mean, if you think that we have about half of their known repertoire, that we know what it sounds like, even if we don't have it exactly Belf playing it, we at least know what the repertoire was, and that provides interesting information. And hopefully more things will come to light. It's really interesting in terms of collecting. For the last few years, up until about, when COVID hit pretty much, the number of discs that I was acquiring had really slowed down to a trickle. There just wasn't anything that was coming available that I didn't have already. And then all of a sudden, in the last 2 years, I've gotten hundreds more discs of really rare material. And I think it may be that collectors are starting to, downsize or something and making their collections available. So material, hopefully in the next 10 years, more will become available, and then we'll know even more of the story. But that's about what I have to say. So have at it.
Thanks, Sherry. That was fantastic. It's so good to hear those recordings side by side and really just get a chance to listen there and then on the spot. Lots of fascinating information and quite a few thoughts, I should think, from our very informed audience. Does anybody want to ask a question or share a thought or a comment? Kurt, actually, I've got a question. Kurt mentioned a couple of times that, in his view, the recordings could be up a tone or a little, and therefore a little faster. Are these the recordings that are already on the site, and are there any plans to sort of upgrade them if new information comes to light about how they should sound? That's a question for you, Sherry.
Well, yeah, we've had this discussion. I mean, Chris is pretty clear, my engineer, that he goes by, things internal to the recordings as opposed to these other things. I think, could he do them over? Yes. I'm not sure that's the best use of my resources, but it's very easy to find apps that will let you adjust the sound to what you think it ought to be. And in fact, in one of the comparisons, I did that because the recording didn't, I wanted it to sound closer to what the other recording was for the purposes of comparison. So I think that, unless we get to the very end of digitizing the collection and there's money to spare, I think they'll stand as they are.
Sherry,
Thanks.
Yeah.
about just on that topic though, would it be possible for you to install the same kind of control on there as they have on Russian records? Then people could do it directly.
Well, that's I'm not the person that's responsible for putting these online. I mean, that's done by the university. So, for in an official capacity, that would be something that they would have to do. And I don't know that they've got the resources either, but I can certainly mention it to the people at the library.
It might be relatively simple. I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea. And it's actually not the library. I mean, it's a very convoluted process. I mean, I provide the information and the sound files to the library. They do the cataloging and put in the metadata, and then it's actually posted by yet a third entity, their digital collections management team. So I don't know, but I will certainly bring that to their attention and they can see if there's anything to be done. It's a good idea.
If I may,
Sure.
just a few, trying to be quick points. Let's take the last one you spent a lot of time with, the Hop-La-La. Lebedev, I think, recorded that as a vocal on Serena about 1912. It's a well-known Romanian tune. Tetos Dimitriadis probably knew it originally as a Greek tune. It has a long history among Greeks. It's called, among other things, Ivlacha I Penemeni. And my point here is that some of these later versions from Jewish sources may not, in this case, go back directly to Belf, because that tune was very well known already in Europe. It was shared by at least Romanians, Greeks, and Jews.
Yeah, let me just say, I wasn't suggesting that everybody learn these tunes from Belf. I was just pointing out that the tunes have been recorded other places.
I mean, I think that some of them, that Belf was very influential, that some of the, a large part, I suspect, as I think you do and others of us do, of the American repertory come from knowledge of Belf material. That's, of course, who can say, but we can only guess. The Arbeitsmann that you played, the pate version of that tune, which is actually only partially correspondent, and the Melnikov and so forth. For all of those, Joel Rubin has written an article. He can post the name of the article of the various sections of that you find shared. Well, you find them in various recordings on the Jewish side, also on the Greek side, and I've traced that to a 1906, the earliest version of that tune, which was featured in the Greek film Rebetiko, that melody, and so forth. That's a Greek tune. I found the recording from 1906, and I have various versions of that, including Lebedev and Chernyavsky and other, not Lebedev, Brandwine and Chernyavsky and others. If someone wants to write me at martz@berkeley.edu, I'll share a private video on the history of that tune and my discovery of the earliest prototype of that tune. But Joel should post his article about that. Speaking of Greek, very quickly in passing, part of that Urabina thing also appears curiously in a song by Mikis Theodorakis called Rapitsona. Finally, I'd like to ask, that Lipyansky recording on a Soviet label. That label was curious. What's up with that? Trust, Trust.
Yeah, MUS Trust. I don't know. It was just one of the. I have I have a number of recordings on that label. It's honestly, I don't understand about the Soviet labels because they all seem to be the same label and different at the same time. So I don't know, but there are a number of recordings on that label.
Thanks, Marty. We've got Kurt, I think, next. He's got his hand up.
Go ahead, Kurt. Hi.
Got my hand up.
Yeah.
On that Urabina recording, it's delightful that you played that, and then the comparison of the other recordings that reproduce that apparent introductory section. That interested and intrigued me for years. Only relatively recently, I paid attention to the fact that while the clarinettist is playing that strange melody, the violinist is playing the normal A section melody. And although I have no way of proving this, I am absolutely convinced that that was simply a mistake, because not only does the clarinetist play the wrong melody at the beginning, but then he just kind of fumbles around incoherently for the second half of that section. What's fascinating is that two other groups then reproduced precisely that fumbling intro as though it was a composed part of the tune. Like I say, there's no proof,
Right.
but I cannot think of any other reasonable explanation for it.
The piano also changes chords as if the regular melody were happening during the introduction. Yeah.
So I have no doubt that Abe Schwartz either learned the tune or was inspired to record the tune based on that recording. And there's a few other bits of telltale evidence of him recording pieces recorded by the Belf Orchestra, and often using the same titles and so on and so forth. Thank you. This has been fun and interesting.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for making all of us aware of Belf in the first place.
Yes. Okay.
Thanks, Kurt. Joel.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna come back to the Hop Ya Ya, and I am not the expert on this, but Martin and Kurt and I and some other people have been discussing that tune of late, and if I remember correctly, one of us had traced it to Turkish Küçük dancers, which are sort of like young boy. Kurt, that was you, right? Maybe you can say something about that.
There's a recording which I got from Zev Feldman many years ago of present day Turkish musicians who have made historical recordings of the music of the famous courtly dancing boys of the Ottoman court.
Wow.
And not the entire piece, not the Sirba-like sections which follow, but the opening two sections, the ones that begin bum bum bum, that end with a dum ba dum ba dum ba dum bum bum. Those are played very slow and very stately, comprising three sections of this Ottoman court music. Bum 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 ba dum ba dum ba dum ba da da da. Bum 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 ba dum ba dum ba dum bum bum. And so on and so forth. That's the closest thing we have to an original version of that, but I know no more about it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that sort of confirms why it maybe sounds so different from so much of the other klezmer repertoire. But it was very popular in Romania, as Martin said, and it was also used in classical music, isn't it, in one of the UNESCO Romanian suites or something?
Yeah.
So it was very widespread.
Yeah, well, that was why I was so delighted to find Yiddish words set to it, because that just took it to a whole different dimension in a way.
Thanks. Any more questions or comments? Well, Sherry, we've been going an hour and a half, and I guess, would you like to make
Can I ask a quick question? Sorry.
Yes, I can see you.
More about what were these recordings produced for? What was the market? Where was the market? Who would listen to them originally? Did anybody know that?
Well, I think, people bought them, not as much as they bought cantorial music, but they did buy them. And while there's some evidence that Sirena did market in this country, in North America, mostly they marketed within Russia and be the palest settlement, I imagine. And
Okay.
you know, I think that one thing that's really interesting is that so many of these have survived, and they managed to make their way to this continent, even though they probably originally had been
there's probably
provided
more
in Europe.
There's probably more in North America than there are in Europe.
At this point, perhaps, yeah.
I'm interested in where were they playing before they recorded them? Because the recording is only something which captured what they were playing. What were they playing for? What was their audience? Was it parties, weddings, festivals, or what?
Mark, could I answer this, please?
Yeah, sure.
They were these guys. Belf, his name apparently was Belfer. He was a klezmer, and he was playing like what klezmers do. They're playing it mostly at weddings.
Yeah, whoever paid them.
Huh?
Whoever paid them, basically, or where they were needed. Yep.
Yes, but I mean, they were well established in their local area, and they had their reputation in the local area of Lipovitz. That's in the.
What interests me is because my great grandfather was born in Yashin, around that area, and I was just curious about whether he was listening to this music as he grew up.
Well, the music like this, yes, but these Belf, they marketed themselves as Romanian. They were not really Romanian, but they were near enough to Romania to have quite a bit of the repertoire. I don't think the style is what you would find with the same as quite as a Romanian Jewish band, even of that period. But the other question you said is about marketing. Well, if you could get a copy of I think it's posted on the Klezmer Institute site. I found an actual description from a trade magazine talking about how the Belf was just kind of discovered by accident by the manager of Sirena, and the record sold like hotcakes. And you got to believe that when you see how many were made, and then the other labels doing both Belf and imitations of Belf, and they actually say that how many were being shipped every day southward, as he said, meaning because the company was in Warsaw, they were shipping them to,
Romania,
Romania, but particularly and Ukraine. So if I have actually translated that little passage from the trade magazine. I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, but if you can look that up, you'll find that specific question addressed.
Fine. Okay, that's
about
good.
marketing, yeah. And I think that, by the way, the Romanian bit is also marketing, but that's a whole other story. But the Romanian stuff was popular. Yeah.
Sells more than Ukrainian stuff or Belarusian stuff, or Polish for that.
Yeah.
There are a couple of other questions. One is, Sherry, do we know anything about the volumes of these that were produced from the notes that you have? And another question that I'm going to ask Eve to unmute in a second and just give an answer as to what you're actually talking about there in the chat.
The volumes, I mean, how many recordings did they issue? I mean, how big was the run of each recording?
Yes.
I have no idea. No idea.
Well, how did it compare to what was coming out from the American bands at the time?
No clue.
No clue.
Jeff, you're muted.
These were basically the first, not literally the first, but the first kind of modern klezmer recordings were made in America. Ellen Krieg and the Yankovitz and Goldberg made for Columbia in 1913. So it's about almost the same time, or was it 1913 or 1915? No, 1913. So how they could, and so also another thing is that I left out when talking about marketing distribution. There was a company in Baltimore that was importing them, the Belfs, Sirenas, but I don't think they were not very well known in this country. There are not a lot of them floating around. I don't think it's true that there are more of them in this country than in Europe. Do you, Sherry? Do you get any idea of that?
Well, it's hard to know how they got here, but I've gotten a lot of them. From dealers in this country,
Well, the reason,
as opposed to Europe. So they made their way here. I'm not sure that they were sold here originally. I mean, I always imagined that, people bundled them up in their peklach and brought them over, but who knows?
Thanks.
Joel? Did you ever think of-
Oh, well, this is just, I mean, Jeff can probably answer this better than I, but I think this is something that he was talking about and I've thought a lot about as well, which is the marketing, which is that at the time that these recordings were coming out, and the first ones, I don't know, the first Belfs were made in what, 1912, 11? And there were some other, and there were a couple of other orchestras that were recorded even earlier, but let's say not earlier than maybe 1908, 1909. This was around the time when shtetl life was perceived as breaking up. This is even before World War I, and ethnographers had written about this. Samuel Weissenberg had written about how the wedding in 1913 was just a shadow of its former self and all this kind of thing. And there was a lot of urbanization at that time. A lot of former shtetl Jews were congregating in bigger cities, Odessa, St. Petersburg, whatever, Warsaw, and they were nostalgic. I think that's a really good explanation, actually.
They were nostalgic and they had money to spend.
Yeah.
They were doing.
Yeah, they were working. They were working.
Right. They could afford a phonograph.
Thanks. There's a correspondence going on in the chat about one of Julian's compilations, which I'm not sure if Joel was involved in the liner notes on the Warsaw's Jewish Mermaid. But Julian, do you just want to say, Sherry, do you mind if Julian just says a couple of words about his compilations, just in case people here don't know about them, of European recordings?
Yeah. I brought out a series of, actually it was 5 or 6 CDs in total, of which three of them were devoted to European recordings. One is the Sirena recordings made in Warsaw between 1909 and 1933-34. Then we did another one from the EMI archive, which was a fantastic compilation I did with, Joel did the notes, or most of the notes for it, of klezmer recordings made in Eastern Europe, in Odessa and around the area, around about 1910. And we did another one of the Yiddish theater in Lemberg, of which there were hundreds of recordings made, and we just chose about 25 of them as representative of what was going on there, which is, of course, another story altogether. The Lemberg recordings are absolutely amazing, but mainly vocal rather than instrumental.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're remarkable resources if to get hold of on CD. But moving back to Sherry's remarkable collection, which is the point of today. Sherry, you mentioned to me before we talked, before we went on air, as it were, that you've got another couple of projects in development, and one of them is going to be in the series that on a Monday night with Josh Horowitz. Do you want to say any more at this point about those?
Yeah, one of the things that came up while I was doing the work for this presentation was a couple of the stellar recordings of theater titles were noted on the label as being from Shir HaShirim, which was one of Rumshinsky's operettas. And I contacted Ron Raboy, who's my Rumshinsky expert, and we figured out that one of them, no, two of them exactly correspond, the recording exactly corresponds to the printed sheet music arrangements that were done from New York, even though these were European recordings. And also was able to get from him listings of all of the songs that appeared in that operetta and also Dem Rebens Niggin. And one of the things I'm really interested in doing is looking at that correspondence between the instrumental versions of these theater arrangements and the songs themselves. Rumshinsky also, he released two potpourri from Dem Rebensnigen, which was another one of his very popular operettas. And one of them is actually a four-sided piece of music. And it's really interesting because I was able to identify, this was before I was in touch with Rod about it, I was able to identify 5 songs from that operetta that I had in the collection and was able to listen to them and see how he wove them into this music, into this instrumental music. It wasn't like an overture where you play a little bit of song A and then a little bit of song B and then a little bit of song C. It was really much more complexly interwoven than that. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping to be working on. And the other is I've just begun talking with Miriam Isaacs about collaborating on a look at recorded wedding scenes, which I find fascinating. There's a whole pile of them available, ranging from a single-sided Badchonis to Cyrene Electro recorded an 8-sided Yiddish Chasana in the 30s. And I'm interested in a couple of aspects of that, one of which is, are these satirical? Are they straight? Why would people be listening to recordings of wedding scenes anyway? At least I have at least one recording of a chazan singing straight up Shiva Brachas, which seems really odd that anybody would want a record of that to listen to in their leisure time. But also, you know, as an instrumentalist, I'm most interested in looking at what were the shtiklach of music that were interspersed amongst the Badchonis. You know, when the Bodkin, you know, says, you know, spiel a chuppah march or, you know, whatever, what are the pieces that are chosen? And was there any change to this over time? I mean, you know, you can see it in other things where certain tunes became emblematic. If you wanted to suggest Jewish, you do a little bit of Chassan Kalam Mazel Tov or a little bit of Mayofis or something like that. And so what are the instrumental tunes that are woven into these scenes? And again, having this vast collection available is what makes that kind of exploration possible. So I'm looking forward to doing that once I've gotten this. This has been very absorbing over the last 6 weeks. So now there's time to turn attention to other things.
Thanks, Sherry. I encourage people to get in touch with Sherry direct. I don't want to go off on a conversation about these things now, if we can help it, fascinating as it might be. Marty, you've got a couple of final things to talk about on the topics under discussion today. Is that right?
Thank you. Yes. Really off topic, but that word trust, since the label is in Latvian, not in part Russian, part Latvian. For all I know, trust could be a Latvian word. So if you're curious about that label, see if there's a Latvian word, trust. Off topic, I heard last night on BBC a wonderful program on the recording of Jewish material, including Yiddish material of all sorts in Germany, just before the Nazi period. A fascinating little documentary on BBC. Alan Byrne spoke there, Sasha Luria and Rainer Lotz. And it probably isn't hard to listen to that again. Certainly Alan Byrne would know how to get that BBC program. So we don't know much about these labels that were German Jewish labels. in this period, and they may contain some very interesting material for us. But that's a very moving documentary for BBC, and well, I don't know if it's a documentary, but it was their midnight hour. So do check that out.
Yeah, we've got Gerald and Julian, and I put a link in the chat. Sorry,
Oh, yeah, I can just say, well, first of all, the material that the Summer Reloaded project, or whatever it's currently called, that Alan put together is based on a huge resource. Actually, a Bear Family Records, together with Rainer Lutz, put out a reissue that's something like, I forget, it's a ridiculous number. It's like 15 CDs or something like that of material from these labels. So it's called Beyond Recall, and it's Bear Family Records. It's quite expensive, but I think it's still in print. And that thing from yesterday, I saw an announcement for it. I think it's a podcast by Shirley Gilbert, who's a British musicologist.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's up there somewhere. I saw the link.
Thanks. Okay. Sherry, any closing remarks?
No, I mean, I think, all of this has sort of convinced me, all of this muddling around with all this stuff has really convinced me. It seems very likely that the Stella and that any tune recorded by any one of these 5 labels in this universe probably represents Belf repertoire. I think that's not unreasonable conclusion at this point. And as long as we surround that with the caveat that we don't know for sure, I think it's reasonable to speak about that. Which what does that mean? Why does it matter? Well, I think it's interesting that Belf recorded Jewish adjacent material. I think it's significant that Belf may have recorded theater material. I think it's just interesting to think about when we think about the place of Belf in the overall repertoire and the history of the music. So I don't know, people can draw their own conclusions. That's why I provided as much of the information as was available to me for people to look at and make their own conclusions from it.
Thanks, Sharon. We look forward to the next things with the next people on the similar topics.